All right. Hello, hello. We are live. So just going to wait a couple minutes to see who's here this evening for this great conversation for the BGC Book Club's May 2021 selection. So just going to give everybody a few seconds to come on in the room on this Wednesday night. So I see a couple of people are already beginning to join us. So please, if you can, drop your hello in the comments. Let us know where you're joining us from. And just want to welcome you again to what I know is going to be an awesome conversation with an outstanding young authoress, I'm going to call her, this evening. So yeah, I've been watching Girlfriends. I know Maya was an authoress, so we have one joining us this evening. So welcome. Come on in the room. Let us know you're here. And you can like and share and put it out there for your book-loving friends so that they will be abreast of what's going on this evening. So for those of you all who don't know me, I am Marcy Thomas. I am the founder of Brown Girl Collective and also your host and the leader of the BGC Book Club, which has been in existence actually right at this point. We started it in April of last year, so we have already surpassed our first birthday. And it's been such a pleasure to have so many wonderful people to join with us who love books and be able to also talk to some of the best Black women authors in the world, I would say. So tonight is no exception. So once again, if you're here, come on in, let us know you're here, drop your name in the comments, let us know where you're joining us from. And we're going to go ahead and get started because it looks like we've got a good crowd. So tonight, I want to welcome you again for our May Book Club meeting. And tonight we are going to be joined by Kaitlyn Greenidge, who's the author of our wonderful book of the month, Libertie. So as a point of our introduction, Kaitlyn Greenidge's debut novel is We Love You, Charlie Freeman. And it was one of the New York Times critics' top 10 books of 2016. Her writing has appeared in Vogue, Glamour, I'm sorry, I can't read today for some reason. Vogue, Glamour, The Wall Street Journal, Elle, BuzzFeed, Transition Magazine, Virginia Quarterly Review, The Believer, American Short Fiction, and many other places. She is the recipient of fellowships from the Whiting Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, the Lewis Center for the Arts at Princeton University, and the Guggenheim Foundation. She is currently features director at Harper's Bazaar, as well as a contributing writer for the New York Times. And as I've already mentioned, her second novel, which is Libertie, was recently published by Algonquin Books, and we're going to talk about it this evening. So without any further delay, let's welcome Kaitlyn Greenidge to the room. Welcome, Kaitlyn.
Hi, thank you for having me. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to have you here. As I mentioned, let me get a sip of water. For some reason, I can't talk all of a sudden. As I mentioned prior to you joining us, I had the opportunity to read We Love You, Charlie Freeman as well. And I really enjoyed that book. So I found it, quite a pleasure to have you with us and be able to read Libertie. So one of the things, we'll just share a little bit with us about what is it that has drawn you to write the types of books that you write, because in both books, there is like a historical piece. And I also noticed there's a thing with science. So I'm like, you must have had a lot of experience with science throughout your career, even prior to writing, to include scientific things in the books that you write.
Yes. My experience is sort of always really skeptical of science, I guess, and knowing sort of like the history of scientific racism and how much what we develop and sort of understand as science comes from people, right? Like it comes from really real historical forces. And I think oftentimes in American culture, we act as though it sort of arrives out of nowhere, just sort of like fully formed. And so, especially with We Love You, Charlie Freeman, and also with this book, Liberty, yes. I sort of want to push against that and sort of figure out where do our systems of knowledge come from and our understandings of knowledge come from.
Okay. Well, thank you. That definitely makes a lot of sense, because there are so many things that we hear, especially right now in this day and age with everything going on with, the current pandemic that we're still in. And some people listening to the science, other people not listening to the science, so it is something that a lot of times that we struggle with. Specifically, I would say in our community, like you have people who are like, okay, I'm going to go get this vaccine. And you have other people like, no, I'm not doing that because of the things that have happened with us historically.
Yeah. I think that's so interesting because, like that mantra that sort of came out at the start of the pandemic, like listen to the science, it's so reductive, I think. And most of us sort of feel that in conversations that we have with people in our communities, especially, as Black people, as people of color, we know how often science has been used to sort of harm those of us both historically and just in our everyday lives. And so I wish and I hope that as we move, one of the things I hope that we learn from this pandemic, even though it doesn't seem like we're learning a lot from this pandemic, but one of the things I hope that we can learn from the pandemic is how much science is, what we consider science is really just another version of culture. And there are, it's very tempting to sort of think of empirical truths, but science is in fact sort of a conversation between a bunch of different actors. Like I did an event at the start of this tour with Shonda Prescott Weinstein, who's a Black astrophysicist. She's one of the few Black women astrophysicists in the country. And she's written a book called Dark Matter about race and astrophysicism and sort of like how she understands race as both as a scientist, and then also she's making the case that scientists should include an understanding of the history of race, even in something that feels like really esoteric or completely removed from it, like astrophysics. And so speaking with her, she sort of pointed out science is constantly a moving target and constantly in conversation. And when it's working correctly, it's people sort of constantly questioning each other's, how each other got to a certain conclusion. Right. And when we treat it as sort of like this thing that sort of just comes down and is immovable, and then also that the questioning is somehow a threat, or if the questioning comes from a certain group of people who we don't give as much authority in society, it doesn't count, then we're losing sort of the main thread of what the scientific method or the scientific model can offer us.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that was just one of the things in reading the book and comparing, even though they're totally different stories. I'm like, there has to be a reason why that's something that is a central part of the stories that you tell. But specifically with Liberty, and one of the reasons why I chose it for this month is because it is a story of a mother and a daughter. And of course, in a few days, we're coming up on Mother's Day. And while there's just so much to unpack in the relationship between the mother and the daughter, but one of the things that I also loved is the fact that you took basically based upon a story of the first, one of the first Black female physicians. What was it about that made you want to translate it into this particular story and then carry it from there?
So I had been working at a place called the Weeksville Heritage Center, and it's dedicated to the history of Weeksville, which is this free Black community that was founded in Brooklyn in 1838. And Dr. Susan Smith McKinney Stewart, who the book is based on, she was a daughter of that community. Her father was one of the founders. So she grew up in this incredibly sort of dynamic environment full of free Black people who were interested in creating this and sustaining this community for Black social and political power. And she became a doctor. Her daughter ended up marrying the son of the Episcopal Archbishop of Haiti. That marriage fell apart. And one of my jobs when I was at the museum was to interview descendants of people who had lived in that community. And so I interviewed the descendant of that line of women, who's a soap opera actress named Ellen Holly.
Okay, I know who she
told
is.
This. Yeah, you know Ellen Holly. She was on One Life to Live.
Right.
Yeah, and she has her own memoir called One Life, where she charts her whole family history from the 1790s up until her life. It's fascinating. It's really well written, and it's still in print. So I recommend people checking that out if they're sort of interested in more of the history. And she told me this whole story of the doctor and her daughter, the daughter getting married, the marriage being really abusive, falling apart, the daughter writing to her mother, the doctor, saying, "Can you help me get out of it?" And the mother eventually helping her leave the marriage. And Ellen Holly was such a wonderful storyteller and so wise, in that she really, in her telling of this oral history to me, and my boss, who we were taking the oral history together, she really put it into historical context and was sort of like, here was this woman who was leaving her husband, and the strength that would have taken, at any time, the strength that would have taken in the 19th century when that was really looked down upon. And then also the strength that it would have taken knowing that she was part of this community of incredibly privileged Black people who saw their every move as proof of whether or not the Black race was going to be viable in the U.S. So it was every personal decision you made was supposed to be a credit to your race. And so her decision to leave that marriage, for the rest of her life, she got these letters from her in-laws saying, "Come back to Haiti. You broke up this marriage, and you ruined, our goal for Black freedom and for our proof of Black excellence by leaving this marriage. You are a discredit to your entire race by leaving this single marriage."
Wow.
And what it took to live with that in the air around you for the rest of your life, but to stay strong and to raise your children and to still have, despite it all, an intense sort of love of the island of Haiti and what it meant to live there, and the dream of Haiti as a place of Black liberation. So that's where I heard that story, and I thought, if I ever get a chance to write a novel, I want to write about this. And then, we were talking a little bit earlier about like scientific racism and sort of like the history of science. And it was another way to sort of explore those ideas as well.
Well, that's great history to know that. And I was just thinking, just the name Liberia, the Liberty, all of that kind of ran together. One of the things that I found very interesting, and for anyone who's watching who's had a chance to read the book, please drop your comments or your questions in the box, because even though I might be doing the interview, this is your chance to have an opportunity to talk with Kaitlyn as well. So please do share your thoughts and comments. But one of the things for me, just watching, like the mother and the daughter, they had a close relationship on the one hand, but on the other hand, it wasn't. There was definitely a lot of ways in which Libertie was trying to live up to this person that her mother wanted her to be. And I guess a lot of times that would happen in a situation where, of course, the father had passed away early on, and there wasn't really that relationship for the longest, that they were all that they had with one another. And just watching how Libertie admired her mom on the one hand, but then there were things that happened along the way where she maybe didn't admire her mom so much.
Yeah.
Just in the context of that piece of it, with your history that you did, was that sort of similar, or that was something that you more or less came up with, just kind of to give some conflict in the story, so to speak?
Yeah, I didn't have access to those letters between the mother and the daughter that I learned about in the oral history. I don't know if I mentioned that part of it, but okay. The mother and daughter were sort of writing letters to each other, and Ellen Holly had those sort of in her possession. Gotcha. And used them to write her own history of her family. I didn't have access to those. So I had the space in fiction to imagine what that relationship might be like and to imagine those conflicts. And when I was thinking about the writing the novel, I knew that researching it become overwhelming really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started to look for sort of structures that I could borrow from, so that I could know sort of where the plot was going, and then most of my mind and imagination could be taken up with research. And so there's a long-winded way to say that I based a lot of the plot points of the novel on different versions of the myth of Persephone, which of course is like, Demeter is the goddess of the earth. She has this daughter Persephone. Persephone marries Hades. She goes down into the underworld. Demeter misses her and wants her back. And there's the spine of that story is this longing between a mother and a daughter feeling the conflict between her mother and her spouse, and sort of who is she loyal to, which I think is sort of like a universal question.
Right.
Like, that's sort of like an ongoing question for a lot of people. And so once I sort of knew that, and I knew that I wanted to explore that sort of relationship and that longing, and that Libertie's desire, Libertie both admires her mother and then also wants to rebel against her, sort of like looking for a way to rebel against her. And once I knew that those were sort of the emotional undercurrents or parts of it, I wanted to, I sort of, it gave me the freedom to sort of play and explore and play with those different feelings.
Yeah, and it was definitely good to see that. One of the catalysts, without telling the story, one of the catalysts that really began, was a couple of things really. One of them was when her mother decides to try to help someone, because not only was she a physician, they were also helping people who were escaping enslavement. And there was a piece in the story where there's a person, Ben Daisy, who had been through, a lot of things. He had escaped, lost the love of his life, was a little bit, discombobulated because of that. And they went to not only just assist him in terms of his freedom, his physical freedom, but also his mental and spiritual freedom, like that. And there were some steps taken to try to help him, which, if you've read the story, didn't necessarily go the way that they may have thought that it was going to go. And I believe that was one of the first times when there was a bit of disillusionment between Libertie and her mom. Was like, okay, Mom, you did this thing, but it didn't really turn out the way that you thought that it was going to go. That was one.
Yeah, I wanted to really explore with the character of Ben Daisy, because he's a person who's escaped slavery, and his experience is completely different from Libertie's. Libertie is born free. She's never experienced slavery, and she's in this free Black community, so she knows what slavery is, but it's removed from her experience. And she's only 7 years old when all this is going on, so she's a child too. And her understanding of what all that means is very hazy. And she meets this man who's experienced intense personal trauma. And she lives in a time period and in a community that doesn't necessarily have the words to describe it in that way. And she's watching her mother, whose, life's mission is to heal people, to make sure that they become healthy. She's a doctor, trying to figure out how you heal from something that is this really huge traumatic event that you may never be able to heal from. And one of the things that I wanted to look at with that part of the story is like, what do we do in our communities with our community members who are trying to heal but act out in ways that that are disruptive or that are harmful to the rest of the community? How do we still support those people, and do we still support those people? Is there a limit to the amount of care that we can give or choose to give? And what do we do with the knowledge that we may have people in our community who have experienced things that they're never going to heal from, that they're never going to act correct about, but they're still a part of our lives? And what do we do? What do we do next? And that's the question that Libertie and her mother are wrestling with around Mr. Ben. And and Libertie sort of is heartbroken that her mother, who she's put so much stock in, she realizes her mother is just another human being and is going to have complications trying to answer that question herself.
Right. And I thought that was very powerful because just in reading that part of the book, I could think about some of the things that we experience even now, some of the traumatic situations that we go through.
Mm-hmm.
And, of course, back then they didn't have therapists and things like that. So it would be a thing of, you're going to pray about it, or some of the things that, they were trying to do with maybe, alternative ways of medicine and things like that. They didn't have therapy like we do now. And even now, some people don't seek it, even though it may be available to them. So that was, and there are reasons why that may not happen, that we know about. But I just found that when I read that part of the book, it's like, wow, there is a parallel, even though this is in the 1800s. There is definitely a parallel to some of the things that we go with now with dealing with being able to heal from traumatic experiences and how that all plays out. And sometimes people are able to get what they need, and other times they're just not. So, to me, that was one of the first situations. The second, that was when they went ahead and decided to open up a hospital because they were looking at ways that they could service people who were being freed and going to come to this new community. And they decided to open a hospital that was for, we'll say colored, we'll say Black. Back then they were saying colored, for colored women. And then at a certain point, Mom decided, well, we're going to open it up to everyone.
Yeah.
And so just a little bit about that was also a thing that I think was a catalyst in changing the relationship or really bringing some things to the forefront.
Yeah.
In that, another piece of it that you touch on is the colorism, because of course, when we had this hospital, that there were people who didn't want Libertie to service them and things like that. How important was it for you? Because we know that it is a thing. It was a thing then, and unfortunately, it's still a thing for some people now. How important was it for you to include that as a part of the story as well?
I really wanted to explore it because I think that in our, it's become like a more popular topic in the last couple of years. And I feel like it's a topic that people feel like they rediscover every like 4 or 5 years. And I think oftentimes what happens around discussions of colorism is it's incredibly, there's no gray areas, ironically, when people talk about colorism, I think. And it's oftentimes at odds with what sociologists who study it sort of find, which is like, there's the belief that somehow light-skinned and dark-skinned are finite definitions is not true. Like people are classified, obviously people are at very different extremes with skin color, but there's a whole group of us who are in the middle, who, are brown skinned, some communities call it. And those people are considered light or dark, depending on who they happen to be in community with. Right. And I bring that up only to point out, like, I feel like oftentimes when the discussion comes up, it's treated as if it's really sort of like cut and dry and really obvious. And I don't know that when you get down to it, many people are living it in such a sort of straight line as that. I think a lot of times people sort of resort to like the cliche stories of like, the girls didn't like me because I was light, or the girls didn't like me because I was dark. And those are real experiences, but the whole history of it and how it has moved throughout Black communities in the US and abroad is so much more varied and nuanced and shifts over time. And especially for the time period that this book is set in, Reconstruction, that idea of colorism would have looked different than what we think of today. Like, slavery ended, and all of a sudden, with the one drop rule that sort of white people made up legally to in response to slavery being done to sort of recategorize people, you had people throughout the South who previously had been known as either like people of color or free people of color, or various different designations. All of a sudden, all those people were just considered Black altogether.
Right.
And what's super interesting is many of those people who were basically white passing, blonde haired, literally blonde haired, blue eyed,
Right.
actually actively said, no, we are choosing to be Black. We
Right.
want to be Black. We want to be in this community. We want to actually, and we want to actively work for civil rights for this community as well. If you look at sort of the civil rights leaders of that time period, 1870s, 1880s, if you look at their pictures, they look like white people, but like they're actively saying we are not. And that actually is super interesting to me around colorism. That idea, when I was writing it, I was sort of trying to read as many diaries as I could from people, and so many of these light-skinned writers and sort of poets of that time period are fiercely proud of being Black, but at the same time are so conscious of color and so conscious of only wanting to marry specifically light-skinned people. They're okay with sort of like flirting with or getting romantically involved with dark-skinned people, but very clear that they're only marrying light-skinned people. But in the same sort of diary entry will sort of be like, and I'm African and I love the African sun and whatever. So it's very complicated, and the complication is where I think it gets really interesting, and where we can have sort of really generative conversations about it.
Absolutely. And there's even a point in the book where folks are sitting around a dinner table and someone says, wow, it's always you light-skinned ones who are like the most radical. And, and I'm like, well, and if you think about, even throughout history, I mean, even in more modern times, if you think of some of the people that were really active in the civil rights movement, you could say the same thing. So yeah, that is just that it is an interesting take on that. But I just thought that was interesting. Just even the whole fact that sometimes people would think that, oh, Libertie, she's a brown-skinned girl. Is she really your daughter? That sort of thing. And I have things like that even in more recent times where people have children and they take their child out and it's like, oh, are you the nanny or is that your child? Sort of thing. So it is definitely something that still goes on. So I'm going to push forward a little bit now. Of course, after that, that second big blowout, I guess, and Libertie, confronts her mom about, the whole thing of taking in the white people and, why are you doing this? You're taking in their money. Don't you know that these people don't care about us? All these other things without me giving away the whole story. Then Libertie does, or her mom prepares for her to go away to school so she can study, to basically, become a doctor and follow in her footsteps. And of course, Libertie goes away to school and discovers some other things while she's away in school. I do like the fact that she had the opportunity to meet some new people and at that point starting to find her own self. With the Graces, Louisa, and Experience. I like that name, Experience. Oh, that's a unique name. But there was also a thing in that I really love that you included in the story, is that the two young ladies, they were singing partners, but they were more than that. Yeah, and so I know some people that might have been surprising to think in the 1800s that there were people who may have been in what we would consider a same-sex relationship. I know you did research and things like that, but I just felt that was an important thing to include as well, to let people know that this isn't new.
No, it's not new. There's a really wonderful book called I think it's called Women's Sex, Color and Poetry. I think it's called. It came out in the 80s, but it's a literary history of these three Black women, Harlem Renaissance poets, and in it, it's all gossip. I mean, it's not really gossip because she uses the historical sources to back it up, but it's all salacious tales about all of them having different girlfriends and dating men and women and sort of like going back and forth and people knowing that they were involved with in same-sex relationships and sort of joking about it. And our past is so much more varied and in conversation with our present than sometimes I think we want to believe or sort of allow ourselves to feel.
Thank you for sharing that. And but one thing with her relationship with them, well, one thing, Liberty always had relationships with women outside of the one that she had with her mom. And I don't mean sexual relationships, just platonic, sisterly relationships. She always had those. And it seemed to me like as much as she loved her mom, that she was also seeking to learn more about what it meant to be a woman apart from what her mother was doing, because she felt like there was something different. Am I right in that assumption?
Yeah, I mean it's really important that she that she, I guess I would say like like we've sort of been teasing out, one of the central questions of the book is like, how do you reconcile or grow alongside your parent, I guess. And I think that's what you're pointing to too, is like she's constantly sort of trying to figure out and rethink how she relates to her mother. And I think so often about like how, I don't know, we can keep talking. I'm not really sure. I have to rethink this sort of point about how we're doing. I'm sorry I interrupted, but yeah, I think that's part of it.
Right, because I mean, I will just use myself as an example. My mom is probably watching, you know. You know how we love our moms, you know. Well, sometimes relationships can be different. We know that that's true as well. But by and large, we do love our moms, and there is always a part of us that want to please her. But then there are parts of us that are our own woman or our own girl, and depending on where we are. And sometimes, we may or may not always have other people that we could look to or lean on to get a different view, because mom knows what mom knows based upon her experiences. And, and grandma knows what she knows based upon her experiences, and so on, the aunts and everyone. And sometimes in yourself, you may feel that you're a different person, and trying to, what should I say, discover, because to me, this book is really about discovery. Self-discovery, but figuring out who you are in the midst of, okay, this is who she is, this is who this person is, but then there's somebody else over there who's doing something totally different. And, I think that's kind of neat too. So how do I take all of these different ideas and views and ways of what it means to be a woman, and even a Black woman? How do I take pieces and parts of all of this and find myself? But in doing so, what I say, do it in a way that you're still honoring your mom. And that's kind of what I got from Libertie's journey.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think this question of how we relate to how women relate to their mother or maternal figure, it's a lifelong question. And I think figuring out the answer to it helps decide how oftentimes we're going to live our lives. And that happens whether we're having that internal discussion consciously or unconsciously, I think. And I think the relationship between mother and daughter, is one that we turn over again and again in our lives as people grow up, because that relationship and understanding of what it actually means and what the connection is changes as you grow, changes as both parties grow, changes as both parties get older. I remember a long time ago when I was an undergrad in college, a really close friend in college, I was talking to her dad, and he said to me, when he said to me, "You're really young," the subtext was like, "You're really young," because I think I was like 19 or 20 when we were having this conversation. But he said to me, when your parents pass away, your relationship with them doesn't stop. Your relationship with your parents lasts your entire life, whether they're alive or they are passed away. And that stuck with me, and that struck me so much. And I just think about that connection, even with parents who we think we're maybe only in our lives for a brief period of time. That relationship is sort of ongoing and constantly turning in our mind. And I think it's crucial to figuring out a sense of self-discovery, and from that sense of self-discovery, sense of self-determination. And that's sort of what Libertie's question is throughout the novel.
Absolutely. So of course she goes away to school. She's meeting new people, experiencing new things. decides she likes music, some other things along that line, and then she's not really doing what she went to school for, and winds up back at home. Takes her friends with her, the Graces, to perform and do these things for some of the auxiliaries and things that her mom are a part of, that the women in her community are a part of. And then she meets this man, Emmanuel, who was working with her mom. And I found that just very interesting because they met and it was like an instantaneous thing where they had an immediate connection. It's almost like Married at First Sight.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Well, they met and it was like, okay, y'all had a couple conversations, and next thing we know, like, oh, okay, wait a minute, what's going on here? But I'm sure, at that time in history, as history is repeating itself now, that for people to, connect so quickly wasn't that far-fetched necessarily.
Yeah. I really wanted the relationship between the two of them to hold like a real promise and romance. And to me, when I wrote it, I sort of thought of it's less sort of who Emmanuel is, although she's attracted to that. It's also sort of the escape that he provides, and their connection to each other is as much about their attraction to each other as people as it is to what they think each other represents. And that is incredibly seductive to the two of them, what they've told each other the other person sort of represents in the rest of their life. And we were speaking earlier about that question of sorry, my daughter just came in the room. We were speaking earlier of that question of self-determination, and we don't get to a place. I think if we don't get to that place of self-determination, we are more susceptible to sort of like those sudden whims around life. If you don't know yourself very well, then it's easy to tell yourself that you're in love with this person who you've met only 3 or 4 days before. And Emmanuel is really similar to her mother in a lot of ways. He's literally studying underneath her mother when she meets him. He's similar to her mother in a lot of ways. In her mind, she's sort of escaping her mother by getting with him, but in many ways, she's sort of becoming sort of deeper aligned into her mother's world by joining forces with this guy.
Absolutely, because I hear a lot of people say that, especially people getting married young, like I went straight from my parents' house to my husband's house.
Yes.
And that's pretty much what she did. And of course, if you haven't read the book and you read it, her reasoning for doing it, she had ulterior motives in doing it, just to kind of avoid some potential situations with her mom where her mom wasn't going to be happy with her. So she definitely did it for selfish reasons. There was a point in the book later on where it talks about, someone tells Emmanuel, hey, be careful about marrying a woman who doesn't know who she is, or something like that, to that effect. I'm paraphrasing a bit, but yeah, she really was searching, and she was still relatively young and trying to figure some things out. And this man was a form of escape. I also think that it was a kind of a, look what I'm doing and you couldn't do it type of situation, because the mom's relationship, past hadn't really been that great. And from what we could tell, there were no romantic, partners since, the father of Libertie. So it's kind of like, well, look what I'm doing and you didn't do it. You weren't successful. So there was that piece as well.
Yeah. And this idea that, I think the romance of a 2-parent, heterosexual home is so strong, especially if you haven't grown up with that. In our culture, that sort of thing as an ideal family configuration is so strong. And that's the other thing that is attractive to Libertie when she's sort of thinking about that relationship, is she's been, her father passed away when she was very young. She's been raised by her mother, and her mother's nurse ever since. And she's so sort of confused about what that relationship looks like. When she goes away to college, she's living with a family who's sort of taking her in, and she sees that it's a mother and a father together, and she doesn't really understand that thing. She's seeing a marriage up close, and it's a mystery to her. She's trying to figure out, like, how are these two people living together, and these two people who are so different, how are they married? And I think that's that's a mystery to so many young people, I think, when they're sort of looking at marriage up close. Like, how does that work? How do you guys like actually like build a life together sort of continually? If you haven't seen that around you, it's just, on the face of it, it seems really mystifying in a lot of ways, which it is to Libertie, and another reason why she's so drawn to the idea of marrying Emmanuel.
Absolutely. But one of the things that I also found was interesting is, though she wanted to do that, but a lot of the women in her life were kind of like, you better be independent, enjoy independence. You better do your own thing, girl. Like, what are you going to do that for? Which I also thought was interesting, because you would think it would have been the opposite at that point in time in history.
Yeah. Well, Libertie's mother is sort of like an outlier, and Libertie's mother, I wanted to make the thing about their relationship that is unique is that Libertie's mother is not a very demonstrative person. She's not really a touchy-feely person, but she believes Libertie is an absolute prize and sort of the best thing that she's ever done in her life, even though she's had this illustrious career and become the first Black doctor and all these sorts of things. She, in her mind, still her greatest achievement is this child. And so the idea of marrying them off to the first person who comes along is completely, goes against the plan. It goes against this whole thing that she has in her mind of how her daughter's life is going to look and be like hers, but better, because her daughter will hopefully have learned from her mistakes and been able to sort of like hit the ground running. And all that goes away once she decides to get married.
Right, absolutely. And I just thought of the pressure that she put on her, because what you just said brought up the quote. Remember, I told you I was looking for a quote.
Yeah.
When she said, and this is on page 91, when she said, the only mother says to daughter, the only good poem I've ever written is you. A daughter is a poem. A daughter is a kind of song. You in the world responding to me is the song I made. I cannot make another. I'm like, ooh, pressure.
Exactly, it's pressure. It's so funny. People are really responding to that quote, and people are saying, "Oh, it's so beautiful," which I'm like, "Thank you." But then there are other people like, "That's a lot of pressure to put on another person."
Like, you are the moon and the stars and the ooh. Like, no, I'm not.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's Libertie's reaction. Her reaction is, "No, I'm not," and her reaction is also, if this is what you think of me, how can I ever be honest with you about my fears or my flaws or anything like that, if in what you're laying on me is that I am sort of like this best thing in the world. And she sort of, to her detriment, thinks she can't be honest with her mother about some of her issues.
Absolutely. So, of course, once she and Emmanuel get married, they decide to move. Well, the whole intent was for him to go back home. He was from Haiti, and he was in New York studying so that he could learn some things medically as a doctor and take those teachings back home. So they get married and immediately, decide to go back home. And of course, for Libertie, this is a totally new experience. Not like being in college, and maybe coming home on, maybe not the weekends, but, being able to go home on breaks and things like that. Now you're in a totally different country, 1,000 miles away from home, and you're in this place and you're with this man that you really don't know. Into a home with people that don't even know about you. So that was just a whole another thing. So, just talk a little bit about that and, how you framed that experience for her. Just, okay, yeah, I don't want to deal with my mom in this situation, so I'm going to get into this other situation, but I really don't, it's not really necessarily what I was bargaining for.
Yeah, I just loved that, to explore that. One of my goals when I was writing this book is I set myself the challenge of writing a novel with believable characters, and it's set in the 19th century, where it will be a Black woman protagonist, and she's gonna make grave mistakes in her life.
Mm-hmm.
But the consequences of it are not going to be sort of like death or immediate abuse. That
Right.
she's going to be a character who's allowed to have mistakes, but still, hopefully, when you're reading it, you can see her figuring out her way out of them.
Right.
And I was so there's a great Alice Walker quote where she's talking about when she wrote The Color Purple. She says the most radical thing I could do was to give those characters in that book a happy ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I was thinking about when I was writing that. I don't know that Liberty necessarily has a happy ending, but she has an ending that is open to possibility.
Right.
And I wanted to keep that feeling of possibility open in her life story, even as she's navigating an incredibly, racist, white supremacist world. She's still within these places, safety places of Black serenity and Black self-determination.
Mm-hmm.
And in those spaces, she has the ability to sort of, what every human hopefully has, the ability to make choices over and over again in their life, good choices and bad choices, and not have the bad choices sort of totally doom them outside of their control to destitution or death or some
Right.
sort of harm in some sort of way.
Right. Yeah, and that's a really good part of the story, just to see, because really, even though it was her reasoning for doing it wasn't necessarily the best, and she learned a lot along the way, and in the midst of all of the challenges and being in this new place and being around these new people, and the different family dynamics of the family that she married into, she still managed to find herself. She didn't lose herself in that. And and she discovered, hey, as much as mama might not, and I might not always see eye to eye on certain things, I really do need my mom. I still need that relationship. That relationship is important to me.
Yeah, 100%. And she's learning these things about herself, and trying to. I hope that the novel sort of has us see Liberty as a character who's constantly in transition and in flux, and the learning is sort of lifelong, and she's going to constantly be thinking and rethinking the events of her life and coming to slightly different perspectives on them, which I think is something that a lot of us do as we sort of grow older. You begin to see number one, the different patterns in your life, and you begin to see how events or people in your life who you thought of as one way, in fact, were slightly different, or were inhabited sort of two roles at once that you weren't even thinking of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that is true. It does come out, by the end of the novel. We're not gonna give away the ending, but it does come out, at the end, that her and her mother, they kind of find their way back to each other, realizing, I guess, the turmoil in the relationship, or just the way that things went down, actually helped them to discover each other and be able to communicate and be more honest about, through letters, which a lot of times a letter is good because you don't have to worry about that instant, but wait a minute, type of thing, is people can write out and say what they're really thinking and feeling in the context of that, and be able to, really be open and honest about what they're thinking and feeling. So ultimately, they did find their way back to each other, and Liberty, found her way home. Literally and figuratively. Found her way back home. So I thought that was great. But is there anything that you would like to touch on that maybe I didn't talk about, that you would like readers to know about, just about the story, or the things that you really want us to take away? Because it really is a book that's a women's empowerment book, definitely. But is there any specific thing that you would like for us to take away from it?
No, I mean, I think this conversation has been so delightful, and I've really enjoyed it. And, I hope people, find things to enjoy in the book. And I feel like we've covered most of it.
Yeah. I think so too. So beyond just at this point, and I am scrolling Kaitlyn's information if you want to. I said Facebook, but forgive me, that's not Facebook. That is Instagram. That is a typo on my behalf. That is Instagram. So the Kaitlyn_Greenidge_ author is actually on Instagram. So forgive me for the typo there.
Yeah.
Surly Bassey. Now, who is Surly Bassey? That's your Twitter handle.
Oh, my family always says that I'm really surly, and then it's like a nickname. It's like a play on Shirley Bassey.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you can follow her on Instagram at Kaitlyn_Greenidge_author, on Twitter at Surly Bassey, and then of course, or Bassey, and then of course on her website at KaitlynGreenidge.com. So please follow to keep up with the things that she has going on, and get in touch. If you haven't purchased the book yet, please do. It's a really good read. So I would encourage it. There's a lot that you can learn historically, because there's a lot of historical stuff in there. And then also just the story of this young woman's journey that is in a lot of ways similar to the journeys that we have over 200 years later. So
yes.
So what is it that you've got working on now? What can we expect to see from you coming up in the near future?
I have a short story coming out with Scribd, which is an online publishing platform, and it's very different from Libertie. It's set in the present day. It's set last summer, so it's set during pandemic summer, and it's about a woman. She goes to a sex party in Brooklyn, and she realizes she's the oldest woman there when she walks in the room, and she has like a reckoning with sort of what is she doing with her life during this pandemic. What does she actually want out of life, kind of situation. So it was really fun to write.
Sounds like
yeah, it was different from Libertie, but same questions about, figuring out yourself and figuring out the self in some ways. And that's what will come out with Scribd in July.
All right, we'll be on the lookout for that. So, well, I want to once again thank you so much, Kaitlyn. I've been working with your team and with you as well to make sure we made this happen tonight. And of course, the video will be up for those who may come in later. If you want to share it out for your book loving friends, please do that, because I feel like this was a great conversation and a good introduction to both Kaitlyn and to Libertie, which, as I said, I believe is one of the best books of the year that I read.
Oh, thank you.
So it is. If you haven't seen the copy,
I'll show you guys the UK cover. That's the one that I have beside me.
Oh, okay, yes. Okay, I think I did see that when that one came out. So it's in the UK as well. So definitely grab a hold of that. And so, one of the things that I always do at the end of and you can stay on for this as well, Kaitlyn, what I always do is announce the book for the next month. And
that's here.
I got a bunch of other stuff coming up this month, so I'm going to make all those announcements now here at the end. So our next book is going to be What's Mine
That's
in
my friend's book.
You said your friend's book?
That's Naima. Yeah, we're friends.
Yes, Naima.
Yeah,
Naima's book next month. And actually, let me put the date up here for you, because I want to make sure I have the date right. I have so many things going on. I got to keep it straight in my head. So we will be it'll be on Monday, June the 7th, because we normally meet on Mondays. We were accommodating the schedule this month for Miss
Naima is wonderful. I found I knew of her as a writer because our first books came out around the same time, and then she mentioned on Twitter, I'm about to have my baby and publish my book, and I was in the same position. I was about to have a baby and hit So I messaged her and I said, we don't know each other, but I think we're in very similar boats. And she and I used to walk around Brooklyn fall 2019 with our newborns.
Oh, wow.
Figure out next novel stuff. And my novel was Libertie, and her novel was her fantastic novel that's going to be your book club pick next time. So
next month.
Yes, new moms.
That's going to be fun. But yes, this is What's Mine and Yours, and the date will be Monday, June the 7th. So I will be posting about the details and all of that. But one of the things I always do at the end is and I don't have it in front of me, but I'll just pick one out of my head. If you can put in the comments a number between 1 and 66, and then I have a little box, but I don't have it near me, so I'm just going to pull one out my head. Drop in the comments a number between 1 and 66, and you will get a copy of this book for next month. So if you're still here, you stuck around this long, you have an opportunity to win our book that we will be reading for next month. Actually, 2 people got your book last month, Kaitlyn. So 2 people. So yes, we want to do that. Okay, I see some numbers dropping in, and well, I'm gonna have something for you, Kaitlyn, anyway. So but yeah, everybody who's still here, please drop your number. And I'm not gonna really look at those numbers. I'm gonna pick one out of my head, and the person who's closest will win a copy of this book for next month. So I'll give you all a couple more seconds while you're doing that. Now, this is not going to be on the Brown Girl Collective platform, but next Tuesday at 5 o'clock, a good friend of mine and I are going to have a discussion about the 3 mothers, about Martin Luther King Jr.'s mom, Malcolm X's mom, and James Baldwin's mom. This book, we will be having a discussion about it at 5 o'clock on next Tuesday. I know that a lot of people will be at work or just getting off, so I'll make sure that the information is available and you'll be able to watch it later. So that's something that's coming up. And last but not least, before I pick a number, and let me put these things up here because like I said, I got so much going on. Good things, but a lot going on. I want to make sure that you all have this information. So Tuesday is going to be the 3 mothers. It's the Voices of the 60s video cast with my friend Faye Paige Edwards. We'll be discussing the 3 mothers. And then last but not least, in terms of books for this month, we are doing, they're not going up at the same time. Hold on 1 second. 1 second. Sorry about this, y'all. Oh, actually, it's at the bottom. On the 24th, I have already interviewed Trey Anthony, Black Girl in Love with Herself. I interviewed her on April the 1st, but we're going to do a deep dive into this book on the 24th. And there is a Zoom. It'll be on a Zoom, so it will be more private so we can talk about some things. And so that link is available. I posted about it as well. So a lot of book stuff coming up this month. So I have not looked at the numbers. I'm going to close my eyes. Let me just pick a number in my head. I'm going with 42. So who's closest to 42? Okay, looks like Vicky, Renee. Okay, you are the winner. You're closest to 42. So you will win a copy of next month's book. So what you need to do in order to claim your copy is to go ahead and send me a message through Messenger, or either if you're in the Brown Girl Collective group, you can put it there, or if you're on the Facebook page, you can just send me a message with your address and I will get this out to you for next month. So congratulations. Congratulations. So that's all I've got for tonight. So thank you everyone for being here, for listening in. Once again, if you haven't read Kaitlyn's wonderful book yet, please go ahead and get it, get your copy, read it, tell your friends about it, do all those good things, as well as Charlie Freeman, if you hadn't read that one as well. Just so you can know what she's all about and we can get on top of that. So all righty then. Well, that's all I have for tonight. So I thank you again for joining us and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thanks again, Kaitlyn.
Thank you.
Have a great
night. Have a good night.
All righty then. Bye-bye.